Yeah, Pro Fan Sports Podcast. Let's get it. Pro fans, tune into the program. Every single week, get the dope, fam. Sean on the mic, very flat too. Keep you updated, that's what we do. Pro fans, tune into the program. Pro fans, tune into the program. Pro fans, tune into the program. Every single week, get the dope, fam.
Yo, what to do, everybody? It's your boy, John Altidor with Pro Fan Sports Podcast, back at you with another one of my boys, Barry and Vlad. Once again, couldn't be here with us today, but today we got the great Jared Weiss, man. How you doing?
What's good, man? I'm good to be here.
No, it's good. It's definitely good, man, to have you on. We were just saying, we started this thing here, this Pro Fan Sports platform, and now we got guys like Jared Weiss coming on, man. We love the work that you're doing, on The Athletic, being the staff writer covering the Celtics, and along with a bunch of other things that I see you on YouTube all the time, on social media, doing your thing, man. How's everything going with you?
I mean, the season's almost over. It feels like it just started. The season goes by way too fast. But I mean, well, who knows? Maybe the Celtics make a deep run and they're playing in June again. So it's but now it's about to get really busy.
Yeah, it's about to get really busy. We playing our last road game against the Sixers coming up, but it looks like some of our guys may not be available. Seeing that Robert Williams and Jaylen Brown may be questionable or something like that, but we'll see what happens there.
I think Rob is out to rest, and then they're going to probably play him against Toronto the next night because they have 2 games against Toronto at home after that. So they're probably going to split him and Horford so that they have one of those guys healthy or available for each of those games.
So this is like the game management stuff,
Yeah,
load management.
Yeah,
load management. Yeah, that's the term now. Speaking of that, the NBA came out with some stuff, with the new CBA agreement, saying that players had to play a certain amount of games in order to qualify for certain awards.
Yeah, they have to play 65 games now, which is honestly pretty controversial because I've always been in favor of having a minimum. I would have gone more with like 55, 56, which I think is around 75% of the season, or is it 2/3 of the season? I can't remember off the top of my head. But like 65 is, I think, basically 80% of the season. And if you are someone who either was injured twice and missed like a decent amount of games, because that's missing 17. So there's 82 games, so you can miss up to 17 games to qualify. So if you had like 2 ankle sprains over the course of a 6-month season or so, or is it 7 months? That means that you probably, that's the limit to qualify. Like, forget about MVP. It's fine to say like the MVP has to play most of the games. But for these All-NBA awards, for like Defensive Player of the Year awards, some of these others, I think it's totally fair for some of these guys to only have played in 60 games, really even. Like Kevin Durant and LeBron James, they should not make All-NBA this year. They were clearly good enough to make All-NBA, but they're going to miss a little more than half, or I guess like 60% of the season. They're only going to play in the 50s somewhere. Kawhi Leonard's not going to be playing enough to qualify. Like, these guys should not be making it over guys that stayed healthy and were performing at relatively comparable levels. And so I think those are the examples where they wanted to set those minimums, at least so so many players have complained about there needs to be a points per game minimum or stuff like that. I don't think that's true, because it's good when we recognize players that don't score as much, but they do other stuff to contribute. And scoring tends to be generally overrated, although I guess now in the analytics, we're kind of like past the boom of analytics. Now it's like we're almost like in a postmodern analytics world where I think people are they've now become over obsessed with all the catch-all metrics that they actually disregard the importance of just like scoring points. It's like, scoring points is extremely important. It is the most important thing, but it's not the only thing. And so I didn't agree when players were like, you need to score a certain amount, but you do need to play a certain amount. And there are a lot of people that are going to have LeBron and KD on there because they're like, this guy was the best. I don't really care how long he played. And like, being available is a very important thing. Being able to stay healthy is a very important thing. If you're not able to play in the games, you're not able to help your team. You can look at it as like, how many wins do those guys contribute? And per game, their win shares per 48, I'm sure is elite, but their actual aggregate total wins contributed is going to be a lot less than a lot of these other guys because they were barely healthy.
Yeah, absolutely, man. So guys like Zion, Kyrie,
Oh, no
you know,
chance. Kyrie,
those
maybe.
guys, you know,
They wouldn't qualify, no.
I mean, nobody watching Kyrie Irving would ever in their right mind think he's an all NBA player because he's not one dimensional offensively. Like he is a really good playmaker, but like he's a gunner. He's one of the best ever at it, but he's a gunner for sure. And like he's ruined 2 teams that he's been on. Like Dallas has been he's not the only reason Dallas is a disaster, but it has not worked in Dallas and obviously wasn't working in Brooklyn. And the stuff he does off the court, like it does matter. It does matter. So yeah, no way should Kyrie Irving be in the running for awards. No way.
Yeah, I mean, I was telling people, Mavs are gonna score with Kyrie, but they have no defense, so I don't know how that's gonna work. And it's played out just like that. They're losing to everybody. With the minimum games that players have to play, with some other stuff in the new CBA as well, particularly the marijuana testing. So that's going to be thrown out now, and
that already wasn't a thing for years anyway. No one that hasn't been enforced forever.
Oh, so that is a guy. I mean, it makes sense because I've seen some questionable stuff during the offseason, especially with some NBA guys. Like, man,
I mean, I'm sure there's plenty of guys like doing coke and Molly and all that kind of stuff, but and they get away with it somehow. But like weed is legal in like almost half the country now, right? So it made no sense for them to have that policy. The NBA had already said a few years back they were just going to stop enforcing it. So this is just them removing it. I don't even think it's a headline. Like this was already the practice.
Cool. Yeah, I mean,
Yeah.
I like to see those guys doing what they got to do, as long as it's not affecting, their game and their production. Lastly, with the CBA stuff, something I was interested in is the league, allowing players to invest in, I think they talked about like betting platforms and things like that. And also there's a in-season tournament that might be coming on.
I'm thrilled with both. Well, no, what am I saying? I'm thrilled with the in-season tournament thing. The betting thing is insane. They claim that there's going to be some sort of separation between the gambling operation and being, and investing in these companies. How? If it's a gambling company, how could you separate that? I'm sure there will be some sort of thorough explanation that they will try to use some logic to explain. But there's no way that if the idea is that they're investing in a gambling company, but they're not going to be promoting gambling stuff, okay, that is some degree of separation, but you still benefit from people losing money to your platform that you're investing in. So you still have a benefit from the gambling aspect of it. So I don't know how they're going to be able to separate that. I also don't understand the legality of it. Like it's illegal for point shaving to happen. It's illegal for players to do stuff. I don't really understand the laws that well, but I mean, Tim Donaghy went to jail for was it for alleged point shaving or was it the corruption around it? Either way, like this is stuff that you could be prosecuted for if you mess around with. So it's going to just invite a ton of scrutiny onto these players. And I'm not sure if they're going to want to do that. Or maybe the SEC or FBI, whoever would investigate it, won't care at all. Who knows? The more interesting part is the ownership aspect, that players are being given some sort of mechanism to start investing and owning teams. And it sounds like there's going to be some sort of central fund that's being set up that's going to be utilized to purchase stakes in teams. I don't know the mechanics of it yet. I've heard like a few concepts over the last few years. Earlier this year, some player reps told me that they were trying to find some way for players to be able to invest in teams, but they were making it sound like it was something after their careers. So I don't know if this is something where they're saving money into some sort of fund that's going to be utilized for purchasing teams after they're retired. Either way, this is just continuing to open the door for circumventing the salary cap. Like up until now, you're not allowed to give people any sort of equity, any sort of side payments when you're trying to sign them to a contract. The best example I can remember was DeAndre Jordan. When he signed a deal with the Clippers also got him a deal with like a local Lexus dealership for like $500,000. and they got in trouble with the league for that. The league investigated, and I don't know if it was draft picks or a fine or what, but they reprimanded the Clippers for doing that. So this is like a pretty blatant way to start going about that. Teams can under the table promise equity stakes in the future, which we haven't really seen before, but now there's like a mechanism to do that. So I am fascinated with how this is going to play out, but clearly they've thought it through pretty thoroughly on how they're going to be able to sell it, how they're going to be able to make it legal and comply. But I wouldn't be surprised if we have a future, 30 years from now where the league is all owned by former players.
That'd be nice, I think. And the in-season tournament that they're talking about, that seems to be pretty exciting. Do you know the structure of that or what that could look like?
So it sounds like what they're going to do is they're going to use games throughout the season as qualifiers for the tournament. So I guess certain games are going to be, specifically designated as a tournament qualification game, and that's going to create standings over the course of the season so that they can, at some point in the middle of the season, have. I wasn't sure if it was just like a 14 tournament or what, but like a mini tournament off of that to decide a champion. I think it's cool because it's different than soccer. Like soccer, they have cups that they run concurrently with the season. So there's like in Britain we have the FA Cup, which is the domestic cup for England. It's different from the Premier League. It's an entirely separate thing. Then you have the Champions League, which is to qualify for the Champions League the year before. You have to have finished in the top 5 in your domestic league, and then you can go play in the Champions League, which is the tournament of all the major clubs across Europe. And you're pulling from England, Italy, Spain, but also like Switzerland and I think Bulgaria, like every single country essentially. And so that's a tournament that's in soccer. The Champions League every year is the most important thing. That's the Super Bowl because it's the battle of all the top teams across Europe. And so it'd be a little different than what the NBA is doing. What the NBA is doing, I think, is more towards the FA Cup side, where it's like more of like a point of pride and you get some money out of it and stuff like that, but it's not the championship. And so being able to bake that into the regular season schedule is the way to do it, because the way it was initially thought out by a lot of people was like, we're going to shut down the league for a certain period of time and do like what they do with the G League Showcase, which is teams are qualifying for the showcase up until it's like from November to mid-December. They play their regular season, then whoever is at the top of the standings for whatever the threshold is, they then go to Vegas and they play a tournament in Vegas, and it's like March Madness style essentially. And so that was the way people were looking at it for the NBA. But shutting down the NBA for a couple of weeks to hold a tournament where only like half the teams are playing in the middle of the season doesn't really make sense.
Crazy. That's definitely kind of crazy, man. The NBA is just, I don't know if the word is evolving or changing. They've done things like renaming trophies, changing the All-Star games, and now they're talking about tournaments in the season. So, it's, I guess they're trying to build a better product and, trying to put a better product out there. And I'm here for it. So I'm here. I'm excited to see how all that stuff unfolds. But on to, our favorite team here with the Celtics. And everything they got going on over here. You wrote an article about the Time Lord, about, his role has changed since he's been back from injury pretty much all year. What do you think about his role change? And I know he's a guy that likes to win. Yeah, so what do you think about, the way we're using the Time Lord? Because, last year, he was a crucial part of the team, and we really needed him to be at full strength to actually make it to where we made it to. But in the end, I think, he's succumbed to injuries, but hopefully he can stay healthy throughout the postseason this year.
Yeah, so I think the big change for him is that the team runs more, so he's scoring more in transition, and so he's scoring less in plays in the half court. And so right now, almost all of his buckets either come from him basically hiding under the hoop in what we call the dunker spot. So the dunker spot is wherever the ball is, which is the strong side, behind the hoop on the opposite side of the paint from there, which is the weak side. That's the dunker spot. And the idea is like a player will drive to the rack, they'll get the rim protector to rotate over to them, leaving that guy in the dunker spot, and then you just drop off the ball to him, and then he dunks from there. It's easy. Rob Williams is so athletic, he can hide pretty far from the hoop and still be able to throw it down. So he's really effective in that space. Now, last year, he was involved more in the pick and roll game. So, Marcus Smart was generally handling the ball. Jason Tatum and Jaylen Brown were too pretty often. They would run pick and roll up high with him. He would just roll straight through the lane. They would get deep into the paint. They would draw the rotation over, and then they would lob it up to him or slip it to him. And they don't run that play as much anymore. The shape of their offense has changed a little bit. They also like to play more spread out more. So just the way they operate in general is more focused on what Al Horford brings to the table than is what Rob Williams brings to the table offensively. And so the opportunities for Rob to kind of create aren't as strong as they used to be, because when you get the ball in the dunker spot, you're pretty much just going up for the shot at that point. Or a lot of his stuff comes on offensive rebounds and putbacks, stuff like that. So it seems like Rob has the ball less in his hands than he used to last year. It's hard to quantify that. There isn't I don't know if there's a time of possession stat or anything along those lines. I guess there's probably number of passes or dribbles per game. There's stuff along those lines, but he rarely dribbles the ball. But even talking to him earlier on Monday, he was kind of acknowledging that he isn't getting the ball as many times as he usually does. He said, I hope they throw a few more lobs to me. But the big thing with Rob is every time you ever ask him, are you okay with this? Are you okay with that? Are you cool with not starting? Are you cool with not getting as many shots? He literally every time is always I don't care as long as we're winning. And so I don't know if Rob just doesn't realize that he's really good and he can be a little bit more selfish, or he genuinely just doesn't care at all. He should care. It's money depends on it. He's not getting as much money as his talent, but that's because of his health. And so I think it's actually probably reasonable at this point. But Rob, the more that Rob does stuff, the better, because he's such a good passer. He's so athletic. He's so difficult for teams to deal with. So it's the more they can get the ball in his hands, I think the better it is. You can only get him the ball in his hands when he's on the move, when he has an advantage, because he can't dribble the ball. He's not comfortable with the ball. So finding ways for him to do that in the offense, it hasn't been as organic as last year. And so he's had to find ways around the edges to kind of be a value add on offense.
Yeah, no, for sure. It's pretty much night and day, and a pretty drastic change as far as the change of Rob Williams's role and how he's used in the offense. Is right, with not having the ball in his hands as much, and really not really not getting as much touches as he was previously, and with the Udoka offense last year. So with the lobs. Now wanted to ask you, Jared, what are your thoughts on how the season has went with this team, and how do you feel about this team right now? As we're about 4 games, from the regular season ending and going to the postseason. What are your feelings about this team going into the playoffs?
I mean, it's been a very good season. I think people that read my work as of late maybe would think that I don't think that. It's been a very good season. They have the second best record in the NBA. And I think the only thing that makes it feel less good than it is that they were so good so early on. And then since then have been, one of the top tier teams, but not at that level, and not clearly above the fray compared to everyone below Milwaukee. They're right up on Milwaukee's heels, I would say, but they're not quite even, definitely not ahead. And they're a little bit ahead of Philly, Cleveland, Denver, Memphis, who else you want to include in there? New York maybe has a shot at that, but probably not. The West, who the hell knows who's actually going to be great in the West? The Warriors can always just be the best team in the NBA when they want to be. So who knows? They're getting Andrew Wiggins back, according to Woj. So, the Warriors could end up being the team out of the West still. Who knows? Phoenix, with KD finally getting healthy, could be amazing. So I don't think Boston I would put ahead of most of those teams, but the gap is very small. And they're wedged in between, I think, Milwaukee at the top and that whole fray right below them. And so the reason why is that they were so good so early on. That was so long ago. It's hard to remember that. They stopped. They were really good for the first half of October, and then November, they were incredible. Like they were the best team in the NBA clearly at that point. And then December hit, they faced Miami twice in a row at home, and they just weren't quite right against Miami. And then after that, they started to kind of like tailspin a little bit, and they've done a really good job of righting the ship whenever things go wrong. They don't have many 3-game losing streaks. They tend to bounce back well. We saw that, last week was a great microcosm of their season where against Washington, they were just terrible. Bus was late that day. They just did not show up at all being able to compete with Washington. They missed so many open shots, which maybe that was because of the warm up and whatever. They had a terrible day. They come out against Milwaukee and they have basically the biggest blowout of the entire NBA season, as far as like considering who is playing, how important this game was. They absolutely destroyed them. I know Milwaukee was on a back-to-back, but like it was still, and they were on a 5-7. Like it was a rough slate for them, but like it was still unbelievable what Boston did to them. And then most importantly, they came out the next night. They faced Utah, who isn't trying too hard to win games right now, but they did a good job handling business. So I think that was what you wanted to see out of them, is like when they have a bad night, can they respond with like one night where like they go crazy, and then can they maintain that consistency? And they're showing that right now. So, last week of the season, I'm not going to take too much away from that, but after some rough patches over the last couple months, it seems like they've kind of, righted the ship.
Yeah, for sure. They certainly have, been able to do that and not, let those, losses become into like long losing streaks and, and really, really bad, stretches for them. And I think that win against the Jazz was just as good of and important of a win as the Milwaukee one, because I'm sure you are aware of the situation about what happened after the Milwaukee game, or how their flight ended up getting delayed and they weren't able to fly back to Boston that night. That I believe they had to fly the next day back to to Boston, and then pretty much didn't have that much time to be able to get ready and prepare themselves to play the next night against the Utah Jazz. And I still thought, given the circumstances and the situation that they were in, in that game, they played pretty well and, and beat, the Jazz pretty, convincingly. So that was, a really good win, and impressed me that they were able to overcome that adversity in a tough situation, with their flight being delayed. Now, wanted to ask you, are there any matchups as far as teams that you don't want the Celtics, to play, in the first round, or that you don't think that would, the Celtics would match up well against, or are you in the position that they pretty much can match up and play with anyone, that there really is no like bad matchup or matchup that wouldn't, that wouldn't be tough for them and competitive?
Well, so the options are right now Miami or Atlanta. Toronto and Chicago could move ahead of Atlanta and then be in that 7-8 game where they play the winner of that first play-in game. Miami is the obvious choice because even though Miami's having a bad year, every single year Jimmy Butler just hits another gear in the playoffs. He's always done it. I anticipate him doing it again. Last year in the conference finals, even though he was hurt for half that series, played at an MVP level. He was one of the best players in the NBA in that series. He was absolutely incredible. He was the best player in that series. He was incredible. So, yeah, you don't want to see Jimmy Butler again. You don't want to see the best coach in the NBA again. Even though they've had their issues, most regular seasons, the Heat are not that great. And then they really like flip a switch in the playoffs. And Jimmy's a big part of that. And also just like Spoelstra's coaching ability really shines through. No one's going to outcoach him. It never happens. He's incredible. So Udoka, I thought, did a really good job last year, but you can't outcoach Spoelstra. He's the best. So that would be the main team I'd want to avoid. They've matched up very well against Toronto so far this year. Chicago, I just don't see Zach LaVine going on a heater for 6 games in a row, so I think they're pretty vulnerable. Vucevic has done damage against them in the past, so like Chicago could be decent, but I just don't think they have the firepower. So they're all good against those teams. And then Atlanta, I mean, they have good matchups against Trey Young. Like Marcus Smart can really, Marcus Smart can get physical with him and also not take the bait on most of the fouls. Derek White is a really, really steady defender who's really good at not fouling, and he's really good at staying on someone's back without fouling. So I think he can match up well with Trey Young. And then, I mean, Rob Williams should deter a lot of Trey's floater game. So I think they match up pretty decently against Atlanta. And then, like, the rest of Atlanta's supporting cast has been like okay this year, but not great. So yeah, none of these teams should threaten the Celtics too much. I could see Miami taking them 6. I could see Atlanta potentially taking them 6. Toronto, Toronto, I'd be surprised if they got more than one win out of them. I mean, we'll see how they look this week in these last couple games here where they played 2 in a row. But Boston has done a pretty good job against Toronto over the years, and like Siakam has had some monster games against them, but they generally over time can figure out a game plan against Siakam. And Van Vliet just hasn't been shooting well enough this year to really like give them the edge, and that's why they're barely fighting to be 500. So I think the current order of the standings, where it's Miami, Atlanta, Toronto, Chicago, I think that's probably the order of how they would fear it. I don't think there's any surprises to the standings, but yeah, I think there's a clear gap between Miami's potential to be disruptive in the first round, and more importantly, like Miami's super physical, so the toll that it takes before then going into the Philly series, which is going to be intense. Presumably they're going to face Philly, but who knows? Maybe Brooklyn will shock Philly. I can't imagine it, but they like Miami. Not only is Miami going to be harder to beat, it's also going to take a toll on you physically.
Yeah, no question about it. As we saw, in last year's Eastern Conference Finals matchup, that took a huge toll on us. It took us, 7 games to beat them when it shouldn't have taken 7 games, and I feel like that definitely affected us in the finals, particularly in the back end of that series. After we're up 2-1, because it felt like the guys just were gassed and didn't have anything left, and were put on some pretty tired and dead legs at that point of the series. And I think that partially had to do with the series before Miami and how much that took out of them in order to get past the Heat and get into the NBA Finals against the Warriors. Now I want to ask you, what are your thoughts on Joe Mazzulla, and how far do you see this team going, the Celtics, in the playoffs?
They could win the title for sure. Of course, they could win the title. Joe is really fascinating. I've never met anyone quite like him for coaches. He is extremely detailed, extremely analytical, and not just like he likes analytics. Like his ability to analyze and break something down is incredibly sharp. He he sounds like a young coach in the way he talks, and I don't mean that as a slight. What I mean is that he seems so excited about diving into the intricacies of all of the elements of the game. While I feel like a lot of older coaches, they kind of just like talk about history and general themes and stuff like that. While today I sat down with them at practice for a story that we're doing, and I tee him up for a question, and he like runs with it, breaking down every single element of like how they attack a certain coverage and stuff like that. And it's so full of detail. He's able to see so many different permutations of how they can play that, I mean, I'm sure it gets a little overwhelming. And like, honestly, a big part of a coach is like most of these coaches in the NBA, they have a PhD in basketball. They know so unbelievably much. They could map out so many options for all their players on how they want to handle every situation, that the job is to distill it down so that a player in the heat of the moment can know what to do. They can think of 3 words in the top of their head that flash immediately in a microsecond and then go work off of that. Like these guys can take on a lot, but only human beings can only take on so much information. And only some of these NBA players are operating at such an extremely high level that they can handle being like a Rajon Rondo or LeBron James type of player. I see a lot of that out of Marcus Smart too, where it's like they can process so many things going on that they can make reads and they can make decisions about where to position themselves that nobody else can really see. And so a lot of these coaches have that level of basketball brilliance, and it's like, can they find a way to communicate this in a way to these players that they can actually handle and utilize it effectively. And so I think that's been a big part of Joe learning the team and the team learning Joe. And someone I talked to that played for him this year was talking about how it took them a while to understand how Joe works, and once they really understood it, they started really like playing for him. And I think that's the thing, is like Joe is a very straightforward guy at times. He's a very exciting and aggressive and intense guy. And once you get used to it and you get accustomed to it and you start to understand how much he cares and how he expresses it, it seems like people have really gravitated towards that. And so, a good example of that has been just the way that they've worked through all these kinks in the second half of the season, where they came back from the All-Star break and Tatum was just like flat. Like Tatum said, he went on vacation. He never really came back from it for a while. And so it was kind of on Joe to figure out, how can we win when our best player is missing every single shot he takes? And I think he's done a pretty solid job at figuring that out. The test is going to be in the playoffs. Like, are these guys going to step it up when they go down 3-2 in a series? How are they going to fight back? All those kind of things. So, what we're going to see what Joe's made of up ahead. Being a regular season coach is one thing. Being a playoff coach is an entirely different thing. I mean, a coach gets put to the test way more in the playoffs because, you're making game plan adjustments throughout a game, throughout a series, and that's really on him and his staff to make those decisions.
For sure. And just to follow up with that, how confident are you in Joe in the playoffs and in making those in-game or in-series adjustments that need to be made in the series in order to win against the other good coaches in the Eastern Conference that he'll be matching up with?
I think he's going to be good at that part. Last year, I remember Joe getting credit for a few different game plan adjustments and series adjustments that they made. So I think that's probably one of his strong points. And Joe has a unique approach to like timeouts and things like that. That's going to be the interesting thing. Like Joe has a philosophy about how he uses his timeouts that's a little bit out of the norm compared to the standard. He's not alone in it. Like Phil Jackson did a lot of the same stuff he did. So it's going to be interesting to see in the playoffs where getting guys rest, when the crowds are so intense, when you're on the road, timeouts are really important because stopping a run at the right time is really crucial because of the way the crowd gets into it. So it's going to be really interesting to see how he uses those timeouts. But I think as far as adjusting game plans over the course of a series, that's going to be a real strength of his.
It's good to know. Definitely like to hear that. It makes you feel much better about Joe and about this team going into the playoffs. So appreciate you sharing that, Jared. Thanks for share that knowledge and that content with us. Appreciate it.
Jared, again, man, thank you so much for coming on Pro Fan Sports Podcast. You gave us the time. As promised, we're gonna let you go. We're gonna continue following you and reading all the stuff you got out there, man. And we appreciate your work. And please, you're welcome back here anytime. But if not, we really appreciate the times you come on here, man. So you have a good night, man.
This was awesome. Thanks so much for having me, guys. Really great to make this happen with you.
Absolutely, man. Have a good night.
Yeah, same here. Good seeing you. Thanks for your time, Jared.
Thank you, Barry.
Yeah, we'll be in touch. Take care and have a good night and enjoy the playoffs.
All right, you too, guys. Talk soon.
Yes, sir.
All right, definitely. Absolutely. Have a good night.
You too.
Yes, sir. That was
awesome.
For sure. That was a great Jared Weiss, staff writer for the Boston Celtics at The Athletic. This guy got a lot of content out. Obviously, he's one of the GOATs out here that we continually bring on this platform for you guys. So make sure you're following Jared at Jared Weiss NBA for the latest and everything Celtics, man. And make sure you're following us. We're on all platforms at Pro Fan Sports on all platforms other than Instagram, and that's at ProFans_sports. Dropping every week. Make sure you're liking and subscribing to the video. Under this video, there's a black subscribe button. Don't forget to do that. Push that's the best way to support us. So until next episode, man. Vlad, we miss you. We'll catch you hopefully on the next one. We out.
Have a good week, everyone. See y'all next week. Thanks for watching.